Welcome to Witham Sounding Board, a podcast sharing powerful business tips, insights, and trends for those seeking to become a rock star in their industry.
Welcome back to Witham CFO podcast series. I am your host, Paddy Chalmers. I am a part of Witham Outsourced Accounting and Fractional CFO practice line. If you'd like to know more about what we do and how we support our clients, please go to www.witham.com/oasis, and that's spelled OASYS. Joining me today is Chris Pike. Chris is an expert in helping companies transform their businesses. He is a special Advent International. He is a co-chair at Boston Scholars. Scholars is a special place to me, not only because of Chris's involvement, but also because my wife works there as well. Like me, Chris is a huge fan of the beautiful game of football, soccer, which he also played. The discussion today will focus on private equity's role in business transformation and the importance of volunteering. Chris, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you, Cuddy.
Good. I am happy that you took the time to spend 20 to 30 minutes with us, and we really appreciate your time. Let's talk about private equity and business transformation. What are the key areas that private equity firms focus on when helping management teams transform their businesses?
I want to do that, but before I do, I just want to tell you, as background, I started my career in public accounting. So I'm an accountant by background. I started in Coopers and Lybrand in the audit practice, and I did that for 3 years. And then I did M&A advisory services, which is how I was first introduced to Advent, which I joined in 97 when Advent was a smaller firm doing a mix of venture capital and private equity based here in Boston, but spread out geographically. And then for the last 28 plus years, I've been here at Advent, always in Boston, and spent most of my career investing in financial services. And then over time, I did healthcare, and I've also done some software and tech. Sort of been in and around 3 of the 5 sectors that Advent invests in. And to your question, I should say that over the last 30, Advent was founded in 84 by one of the early venture capitalists. And then over time, we became really more of a buyout firm and a private equity firm. And as that happened, and our investing, we were doing later stage deals, there was a persistent aspect of our deploying capital and buying companies, often controlling stakes in private companies, has been transformation. And, we have, I would call, medium-term hold periods. So we usually own a company for 5 to 7 years, 4 to 7, depending on the exit environment. And during that time, we consider ourselves pretty active owners. So on the continuum of active ownership, we're pretty engaged, right? And we buy a company, we're on the board, but we're also oftentimes underwriting cases that we're going to try and help the companies grow faster, top and bottom line, over this 4 to 7 year hold period, and hopefully beyond, right? Oftentimes we'll take a company public, sell down gradually, and then, we want to, the companies remain public and hopefully can still grow. So transformation is a big aspect of what we're doing as we try and generate returns for our investors. And ideally, we're going to beat the S&P 500 or a global stock index, by 500 to 1,000 basis points. That's sort of the bargain, right? Our institutional investors pay higher fees and agree to be illiquid and locked up in exchange for higher returns. And we would tell them that active ownership and transformation is oftentimes an aspect of what we're doing and how we're generating outsized returns for them. And when we think about transformation, it can vary, right? Well, if we buy a founder-run company, Oftentimes they're immature. The founders might have been product people who had a good idea and they started something, but they haven't professionalized aspects of the sales and marketing function, for example. Or oftentimes the accounting functions are very immature, right? We come into companies and their finance organizations can't really report the business in a way that we need in order to drive these aggressive growth and transformation initiatives. They could be immature from a product or R&D standpoint, and there might be things they haven't done. So those are founder businesses have those characteristics. We also carve out businesses from larger companies. We might buy a division of a large public company, and those businesses might have sort of the opposite problem where they were part of something bigger. They were neglected. They didn't get enough capital to really grow and become a market leader. And so oftentimes we're underwriting transformations that are more around helping them, get on their front foot strategically and pushing the management teams like, all right, now that you're on your own, can you grow faster? Are there things you couldn't do inside of a bigger company with investment? Oftentimes we're investing in the early years of ownership and trying to make the company's position to grow faster than during our whole period. So that's sort of a long answer to how we think about transformation, but it is quite central to what we do as investors, trying to beat the market.
That's a long answer, but yeah, I think you touched on all the points that I wanted to get out of you. So thank you for that. Obviously there's roadblocks, right? You getting into a company, you have a roadmap at every inflection point at what you're going to do, right? Sometimes it just worked as planned. Sometimes it doesn't. And that many, many times over. What are some of the biggest challenges companies face in transformation? And how do you try to reinvent yourself to get around those challenges?
Yeah, so when we buy a company, we do a lot of work, due diligence around the market. How big is the market? How fast is the market growing? What's their competitive position within the market? And so we put a lot of energy into that aspect of our evaluation. And then we sort of look at the company and how is the company organized? Do they have the right people in the right positions? Do they have a plan and a strategy to grow over the next 5 years? And we're pretty thorough, I would say, relative to our peers. And, we're pretty thorough. We miss things every time, right? So for as much work as we do and as much money as we spend with consulting firms like Bain and McKinsey or accounting firms looking, how profitable these things are, we always miss things. And so when we get in to a new deal, there is a discovery process as to, which aspects of our work were right. And we build, and as you said, we build these plans. We call them value creation plans that we underwrite, that we say, okay, these are things that we think we can do to a company to improve the chances of us hitting a financial plan and growing. If the market's growing 5%, we might underwrite a plan of 7 or 8% top line growth. And we would say the reason we're going to outgrow the market is because we have these initiatives, these value creation initiatives, and we're going to bring resources into the company to help the management team execute across these particular initiatives. And so we go through the discovery process, and then we figure out what does the company need. Because one thing that tends to happen pretty much all the time is the pace of change quickens, that once we come in, because we have the clock starts running for us and our investors, we got to generate a return in 5 to 7 years. So we really want to get going quickly and get these companies off to a good start. And we do that we have a group of people that we call portfolio support. So they're sort of full-time Advent people who don't look for deals the way the deal people do. But once we own a company, they come in and they're going to work directly with the leadership team of the company on these initiatives that constitute our value creation plan. So we have a pool of Advent employees who A lot of them are ex-consultants. Some of them have been in corporate environments, and they're a resource for the management team. We complement that group with non-Advent employees, but advisors who oftentimes have functional expertise in sales and marketing, tech, right? A lot of the companies we buy, we have to understand, can their technology environment support the level of growth that we've underwritten, right? So we bring tech resources to help those aspects of the businesses, product people, finance people. So we have ex-CFOs who can help our companies and their CFOs and their finance organizations mature. And so now you have this faster pace, and we're trying to dignify, it's getting faster, and you had a day job before we were here. So let these people that we're going to bring in help you manage this new plan and these initiatives that ultimately are trying to grow the business faster. And one of the private equity sometimes gets like, oh, we're just kind of coming in and cutting costs, and that's how we make a return. That's not generally what we do. Sometimes there are companies that their margins are too low, or they aren't as efficient as they could be. So there are deals where an aspect of the value creation plan might be, we're going to trim costs, or we're going to offshore, right? There might be certain functions that can be done in India, for example. But as often it's, how do we get the top line to grow faster? And what investments can we make to do that? And so each deal is a snowflake. There isn't sort of a cookie cutter approach to this, and you have to be pretty targeted in what we think we can do, and then bring the right resources to bear, hopefully try and execute this acceleration and transformation plan that is almost always quite different than what they were doing before we got there.
Yeah, you see a couple points to that. First, you have to be nimble, right? You can have this plan, but you have to be able to be flexible. Say, okay, we're not, we plan on route A, but it's like route B, right? Yep. And how do we get to B? And then two, a good friend of mine always tell me that, well, first you have to be lean, but a business should be able to sustain itself, right? And how do you get away from, well, this is how it used to be done?
Yeah, that can be tough.
Yeah. And how are you able to drive to change the culture and the messaging with business? So that's it. Two things. If you are able to give me an example of a transformation that was supposed to be easy, but then turned out to not be easy, you have to take the ABC route. And then two, how do CFOs and finance leaders align with PE goals, to drive strategic growth? CFOs typically, it should be there, make things lean, make sure the business is self-sustaining, surviving, maximizing investors' wealth. But how do you think CFOs these days will align with PE goals?
Yeah, I have thoughts on both of those, but maybe I'll start with, as an example, I'll just talk about a company that we own currently that I'm on the board of, that we bought in 2021. It was a division of Nielsen Holdings. So if you know Nielsen, most people know it as the company that measures television ratings. So, and then they sell that back to advertisers. It was a large public company. So they had a business that measures television ratings, network television. And then they had a second business that was a data company, which we now call NIQ, that was a 100-year-old company that took data from grocery stores and retailers around the world and ingested point of sale data to then tell manufacturers like Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, what their market share is in any given city, state, country, okay? So it's a very large data business. When we bought it in 2021, it had 30,000 employees in 90 countries. So super global, very complex. The way data as it comes out of different retailers in different parts of the world it can be quite cumbersome to manage and make useful and valuable to Coca-Cola, for example. And that was a business that had really stagnated under Nielsen's ownership, that it had sort of, they were underinvested in their technology. The leadership team they were bleeding share, especially in the US, and they didn't really have a plan. You had a lot of very long tenured employees who were just kind of used to losing. and they were losing customers, losing market share, bad tech. And so their growth rate, but they were in a pretty protected industry because it's such a difficult data business. So there were only really 2 players that could do this globally. And we're really the only ones that can do it in all these countries. But the other one was a US company that was really putting a lot of pressure on them in 10 or 12 countries, developed markets. And so we bought it, and with the thesis that like we could turn it around and get it to grow, 5-6% and get the margins from say 10% to mid-20s, right? Which is still kind of low for a data business, but it had just sort of stagnated, and it was really not in a good way. And we did it in partnership with a management team that we had backed at another deal called TransUnion, which is one of the 3 credit bureaus. So we owned TransUnion. We bought it in 2012 and brought in a new CEO. That was less of a turnaround, but it was kind of not really, it was kind of a distant number 3 to Equifax and Experian. And so we brought in a new guy, and he really got it growing 8-10%, got margins up, and really changed the culture. And so we took on this Nielsen division in 2021 with this new team and this new CEO with the idea that we could fix a lot of very broken things. And we ran into a lot of what you just described, which was long tenured employees who were used to losing, who would tell you all the reasons why you couldn't do this, this, and this, and you couldn't fix that, or that. Well, you know what? They hadn't really tried. They hadn't been given capital. And so we paid about $2.8 billion for it. We probably put $400 or $500 million into a new technology platform. We moved a lot of jobs around operations and technology into India. And we did a lot of M&A early in the deal to address product holes that they had, so that, 4 years later, what was at the time a 0 to 1% growth company is now sort of 6% organic growth. And the margins have gone from, 10 or 11% to, close to 20, with a plan to get them into the mid-20s. So it's been really hard. The CEO is really good, but it's been harder than we thought, to be honest. It was more damage than we realized. But on the back of it, 4 years later, we've got a much better company, a much more competitive company that's winning share and is in a good market. So even in these turbulent, tariff crazy markets, like, it's pretty stable, right? And so we'd feel quite good, but it was super hard to do it. So that's sort of an extreme example. Like, for me, that's probably the most intensive transformation I've been a part of in my 30 years here. Thankfully, we brought the right team in, including a new CFO. So the finance organization, if you looked at it, it was probably like 900 people in finance, right? So of the 30,000, it probably had 900 people just closing the books and reporting, right? And doing tax and compliance. Bad systems. So like getting the close took a long time. They have lots of manual journal entries every month just to close the books, right? So it's one of those, right? That's always like a canary in the coal mine. If the company, particularly at that size, is having to pass a lot of manual journal entries just to get the financial statements right, something's probably wrong. You probably see this in your work. I mean, that always makes me nervous. And so as a result, it took them 30, 40 days just to close the month. A lot of reporting. The tax structure is a mess. Like, they had this complicated tax structure that they inherited from Nielsen Holdings that worked better when it was part of a big company, but now that we were on our own, it really was not tax efficient. So a great CFO, we brought in a great CFO who came from bigger environments. And, there was a real culture change. They had a culture of like, things would be broken. You'd have people in the finance organization doing things that didn't make a lot of sense. And nobody would sort of step back and say, do we need to do that? And could we do it, or could we do it more efficiently? And so they'd make mistakes. And so he really tried to change that and make them more accountable around the world. We improved the systems. So the actual reporting systems were on an old version of SAP that is creaky, but with some middleware, we could get better reporting out of it. And visibility is something too that for a CFO, oftentimes, particularly in these larger companies, really understanding your profitability and customer level profitability and making sure your sales force isn't giving away your products or services, and having real discipline around that. That's something that great CFOs they know when there's undisciplined things going on, and they can control it and tell them, no, you can't discount. So that was also an aspect of Nielsen. We did a lot of work around the way they price and contract with their customers, these multi-year contracts, just even like making sure we have inflation adjusters, right? Like our labor costs obviously went up a lot during COVID and after COVID. So making sure that we could get paid at least to keep pace with our rising labor costs. Great CFOs have the information they need to make sure you can at least maintain your margins as your costs are going up. So those are some of the attributes that I observe that we have now at Nielsen in the finance organization. And also like the budgeting process is another, like really great CFOs have a very strict budgeting process that they stick to. It begins in September. They go out to the different, P&L leaders, and they go back and forth, and they make sure that they're not just being given, hopeful pie in the sky type forecasts. Like it has to be really bottoms up, and they have to drive a process and then hopefully push the business leaders who always want to give a lower budget that they can beat and get paid for that. And that's the tension, right? And great CFOs have a good feel for what's realistic and then how to push the leaders of the company deeper down so they can, really beat their plan. Because that's what we want, right? We want our companies to set an aggressive plan and then beat it. Easier said than done, particularly in this environment.
A lot of good points. I don't know where to start. First, reporting deadline needs to be much more shorter. Is that way you see it? What I did. Financial statement as it is, it's actually obsolete 5 days after the end of the month. So, if you add 20 more days on top of that, that's a problem. Okay. Budgeting is a big thing. Holding each one of those department heads accountable for their budget is also important. And in order for the savvy CFOs, they do that. There's so much areas that you touched on. Let's talk about volunteering. I see you smiling. You're obviously very active in volunteering. I always say there's two things. There's giving, but also there is committing the time, which you do both, and which is really fascinating. And there's not a lot of people that do that. Or there's not a lot of people that do what you do and then do that as well. What is important for professionals at our level to be involved in volunteering? Why is it important?
First, to whom much is given, much is expected, right? And even early in my career, when I was just trying to get started, right? I graduated college. I was like a Spanish major. I had no money. I had to get a job, and I was lucky to get a job in accounting. But even in my 20s, I don't know, like I felt like you have to sort of look around and there's a lot of people that have it worse than we do, right? And so to me, I wish people would take that on, right? And look, we're all super busy, right? There were times in my 20s and 30s. I got married, I was 32, I had young kids. Like you never have time, right? So nobody has time to do more stuff. But I always felt like it was my responsibility to do something because I could, in truth, I could. And also it was really helpful to my work-life balance, right? Like I was in this crazy finance job, working long hours, traveling. I wasn't home much. But if I could go out to a soccer field and see kids play that otherwise wouldn't have a soccer field to play on, like that just, it was nourishing. And it gave me, and it took me out of the mayhem and the chaos of work, right? And also too, like, Boston's a very segregated city. And by going into other neighborhoods in Boston, it opens your eyes. Like you realize Boston is not this office in the Prudential in Back Bay that I'm sitting in. Boston is Roxbury and Dorchester and East Boston. And there are a lot of kids and families in Boston public schools that it's a lot harder for them than it is for me and my kids. And seeing that, it grounds you to a degree. So I personally, for me, it gave me a lot. Volunteering really enabled me to sort of keep things in perspective. And I was lucky. I met a woman I went to college with, got involved with Boston Scores early in its life, right? So Scores, after the World Cup in 1994, the U.S. Soccer Foundation had money left over from FIFA that was given out to spread, youth soccer and youth development, youth activities. And that was the beginning of a program called DC Scores. Boston Scores became the second affiliate of America Scores, which was basically after school soccer for city kids, right? So it started in DC with a school teacher who looked around. I was like, this is terrible. Like, these kids, they can't even play soccer after school, which same with Boston. It's true in most major cities, right? Like the opportunities for city kids to just play, just be on a field and run around is not what it is. I live in Newton. It's not, there's fields everywhere. There's a youth league you can sign up and, pay $50 for. And that just seemed grossly unfair to me. Just because you're a kid living in the city of Boston, you can't go play soccer after school, which if there's any sport you should be able to do. Like, it's not like hockey or lacrosse or, you need a lot of equipment. You just need an open space and a ball, right? I mean, which is how in other parts of the world, right? That's how kids play. Like, South America, Africa, or picket, kids just kick a ball around. And so I was really offended to understand that in the late 90s. And I was fortunate to meet somebody who was involved with Boston Scores, which at the time was quite a bit smaller, but servicing kids. And so I was just really drawn to the mission. I grew up every day. I played soccer after school, right, with my friends. And before school, I played before and after, and that was my life. And I loved it. And it gave me a lot, right? Like being on a team, it gives you structure, and it helps you be a good teammate. It helps you work hard, right? And you see the benefits of hard work. And, Boston Scores, so it's recreational after school soccer for kids in the city schools. And we've managed to grow it over time. And I think it's really important for me, having kids deserve opportunities that, whether it's playing soccer or playing other sports or, the city schools just don't have the same opportunities. So that's sort of how I've channeled my volunteer energy. And it's something I've been involved with now for over 20 years. And I co-chair the board. But the best times of my week, now that I have more time, right? So early in my career, I didn't have any time. I was traveling a lot. Now I have more time. And so I'm super excited whenever I can go out to the field. We built this new field in East Boston that you've been to.
Yep.
But I just love going. And I love seeing the kids and families. And one of the things that we had tried to build a new soccer field in Boston, which is hard to do, as the women's team is finding out. It's, and the Revolution for that matter, it's just very difficult to build a field in the city. Yeah. We were fortunate to partner with the Catholic Church in East Boston, and we completed the field last summer and opened it. So for me, I always envision like kids running around on the field, from East Boston and other places, and giving them the opportunity that Scores always did. What I didn't anticipate is the way it would bring parents and the community together, right? Yep. And that has a real societal, like, you want strong towns and neighborhoods, and you want parents to see other parents volunteering. And that's how you build a stronger society. And the city, like, I care about the city of Boston. I want the neighborhoods to have fabric and neighbors to care about each other. And I see that at the field. When I go to the field, I see the parents not just cheering for their kids, but they're volunteering as coaches, and they're supporting each other. And that's been a wonderful thing, particularly in the last year for me.
Yeah, it's impressive. As you know, I play as well, as you do. Hopefully, one of these days, you and I will be on the field and all around. So I'm looking forward to that. Final couple questions that I have for you. I know the World Cup is going to be in the Americas next year. So if you will pick the last 4 teams that are going to be in the semi, who would you pick? One, wow. And then who do you think is going to win it?
Wow. I haven't. So this is totally top of my. I'm not that informed on which of the teams are good. I would say Spain. I think Brazil's in big trouble. They lost 4-1 to Argentina. I spoke to my guys down there, and they were super bummed out. I think Brazil's in big trouble. Defending champs, probably still good, right? So I'm going to say Spain, Argentina. I think Morocco made it to the semis last time, if I remember right.
It did. Yes.
Which is just an awesome thing, right? So, like, could you get an outside? I mean, who else? Croatia has had, or one of the Eastern European countries made it far too. Could you get probably so maybe one of those? England's like perennially disappointed. How about the Germans? I'll say the Germans, Spanish, Argentines, and either an Eastern European or African team. Who's the best team in Africa, Cuddy? Who's it going to be? Egypt?
Egypt is the most decorated African team. So but they've not been very good. I think Morocco might just be in there.
Maybe Morocco.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a non-European, non-South American team. I'll say Egypt. Most solid place for Egypt, right? Let's say
right.
Egypt. I'll give you Egypt.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. We talked about Advent International and in your time there, and also your volunteer work with Boston Scholars, which is dear to me as well. Is there anything we're missing?
I think that's a good list, but I enjoyed it. I love talking to you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Chris. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you'll be first in line to hear what's coming next. Don't want to wait for our next episode? Check us out at withum.com. That's WITHUM.com.